Again, Bechatzi Halayla, the psukim in Parshat Bo from Shmot Yud Bet that we're going to read on the first day of Pesach. Bechatzi Halayla, Hashem hikak kol b'chor beretz Mitzrayim. Kadosh Baruch Hu attacked all the firstborns in Mitzrayim from the top to bottom of the social ladder. B'chor Paro hayoshev al kiso ad b'chor hashvi asher b'veit tabor. Whether it was the king on top, whether it was a prisoner, and the Bechor Behemah, the firstborns of animals. I said it was a coalition of forces of who would be hit in Makat Bechorot. What's significant here is this displays on precisely at midnight, Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla. The term Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla becomes the name of the poem that we're going to do. And this poem, which entered into the Haggadah, was originally used as the one of the poems to be recited on Shabbat HaGadol in what's called the Yotzrot. Yotzrot, here in Israel, we don't have a clue what it is, but in Chutz La'aretz we remember that at certain special Shabbatot, there were extra poetry integrated into the Chazarat HaShatz, both from Shacharit and sometimes from Musaf, specifically Parshat Shkalim in Zachor, Para, and HaChodesh had Yotzrot for Shacharit, and Shkalim and HaChodesh had Yotzrot, extra add-on poems in the Chazarat HaShatz for Musaf. There's also poetry for Ma'ariv for certain Chagim. They're called Ma'aravot. And here in Eretz Yisrael, we say none of it. And that's because of the objections of the Vilna Gaon to all kinds of interruptions or hefsek, in the davenings of the official brachot that were established by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. The Gemara says, Kol ha-meshaneh mimatbeh shetavu chachamim b'brachot. Whoever alters from the specific coined phrases of our Chachamim, to'eh is an error, and perhaps even has to repeat, and so on. So the Vilna Gaon students arrived here in Eretz Yisrael about 250 years ago, and they bring to a world of Ashkenazi vacuum. We did not have Ashkenazi custom in Eretz Yisrael until the arrival of the students of the Vilna Gaon, and they were the Prushim, where here in this neighborhood you have the Beit Knesset of the name of the Vilna Gaon, and so on. They were here, the Prushim, Chaim Yosef Sonnenfeld, one of the big names, and so on. And already in the days of the students of the Vilna Gaon who arrived in Eretz Yisrael, the author of the Pa'at HaShulchan, Reb Shimon Shklov, they eliminated many things that were done in Ashkenaz because of the objections of the Vilna Gaon. So it's interesting, the Vilna Gaon did not have what to say in Vilna. He was not the town rabbi, nor was he a Rosh Yeshiva. He was a private person in an apartment, in a house, where some students came to his house to study Torah. He did not impact on Vilna at all. Vilna still maintained classical Ashkenazi custom. But the customs of the Vilna Gaon make it here in Eretz Yisrael because of the students of the Vilna Gaon who arrive on the scene not with no competition against other Ashkenazi custom, and that's why it happens here. That's why there's some in the neighborhoods of Yerushalayim who don't even say V'shamu b'nei Yisrael Shabbat before Shmon Esrei because of this same reason. And there are many here in Israel who, for Tal and Geshem, do not do the standard integration of the poetry of Tal and Geshem in the Shmon Esrei, but rather they do the poetry before Shmon Esrei, for the same exact reason that the Vilna Gaon felt that this was a type of a hefsek. So this Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla was just part of a poem that was a very long-winded poem that had to do with Pesach, and it was then cut and pasted out of the Siddur rather, of the davening of Shabbat HaGadol, and grafted upon the Haggadah. And it's said at the tail end of the Haggadah, with another poem that was set in the Haggadah as well, V'chein v'amartem zevach Pesach. V'chein v'amartem zevach Pesach, in Chutz La'aretz, we used to say it on the second night. Remember, there was a thing called the second Seder. You can see it in the Jewish Museum. They talk about it. It's an archival thing. So here in Israel, because we have one Seder, Baruch Hashem, so we say both poems at the Seder, Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla and V'chein v'amartem zevach Pesach. And just a word about the authorship. For many, many years, we did not know who actually authored the Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla, although we did know who authored the second poem, V'amartem zevach Pesach, and that was Elazar Kalir. Elazar Kalir from the 7th century Eretz Yisrael was the most famous poet of Eretz Israel at the time. He authored the Tal and Geshem that we say in our Machzor for Rosh Hashanah, for Sukkot and for Pesach. Tal is on Pesach, Geshem is on Sukkot, and many other poems that are found in the Slichot, that are found in the Kinot of Tisha B'Av, Elazar Kalir. So we do know that Elazar Kalir is the author of Amartam Zeva Pesach. But what he did was he simply borrowed a style from an earlier poet in Eretz Israel in the late 5th and early 6th century. His name was Yanai. Yanai. He's a known poet, except that for many, many years, for generations even, we never knew that Yanai was the author of the Vayehi Halayla until the Karev. The Karev unveiled a version of the poem that gave away the secret that the poet was indeed Yanai. And not only that, but in the version of the Karev of Vayehi Halayla, there's a line that does not fit in to the version that we have in the Haggadah, and I'll point it out. So let's get to, this is a long poem, and what basically it says in a word is that not only did Makat Bechorot, the smiting of the firstborn, take place at midnight, but so many other things took place at nighttime, and the tradition was they also happened at midnight. So let's, just to get the halachic idea of midnight correct, we're not talking about 12 o'clock on our midnight on our clocks. We're talking about the halachic midnight. What is halachic midnight? And that is to take the beginning of the night and then take the beginning of the daytime and split it in half. So let's do the other way around. When does the day begin halachically? So according to everyone, by sunrise, it's daytime. The question is, does the daytime begin a little bit before sunrise? And there's a concept called Amud HaShachar, which in itself is debated how many minutes before sunrise. The classic accepted time is 72 minutes before. Some have a 90-minute view of Amud HaShachar before sunrise, but 72 minutes is the accepted. But for all practical purposes, if we have a mitzvah of the daytime, for example, putting a mitzvah like lulav and etrog has to be taken in the daytime. Shofar has to be blown in the daytime. So we're going to make sure that we're after sunrise to be on the safe side. That's for sure. Now, what about the end of the day? So according to the idea of sunrise, the flip side would be sunset. And then if you take sunrise and sunset and split it in the middle, that's going to be the chatzot, the midday, for various purposes. If you do the same for the nighttime, from sunset to sunrise, and split it in the middle, you're going to get midnight. That's going to be chatzot. Now, in case you haven't heard, tomorrow night we're moving to summertime. In America, we called it daylight savings time. Here we call it Shon Kayetz, which means that midnight on Seder night will be approximately 12:40 on our clock, approximately 20 to 1. And that becomes important because of the consideration that we shall have eaten the matzah of Afikomen by midnight. Now, if a person had not eaten the Afikomen by till 20 to 1 in the morning, you could still eat it, because there's a big machloket as to when the final time of eating the Korban Pesach was. So according to one opinion, Rabbi Loza ben Azariah, you can only eat the Korban Pesach until midnight. And according to Rabbi Akiva, you can eat the Korban Pesach the entire night. And that impacts on the Afikomen. So if you hold like Rabbi Loza ben Azariah that the Pesach, Korban Pesach, can be eaten only till midnight, then we ought to eat the Afikomen until midnight. Most of us get there without any problems. But some people, they say that just drags out, and they're looking at the clock, and they're going to maybe miss midnight for the Afikomen. But according to Rabbi Akiva, where you could have eaten the Korban Pesach the entire night, you can eat the Afikomen the entire night. And that's why if a person didn't eat the Afikomen but till midnight, you eat it. That's also another piece of matzah. At least according to Rabbi Akiva, you're still within the bounds. But nevertheless, according to Rabbi Loza ben Azariah, there's the linkage of the eating of the Korban Pesach with the moment of Makat Bechorot. Because the moment of Makat Bechorot was really the moment of Yetziat Mitzrayim. That was the time that Paroi said, get out, get out. I mean, we were taught in yeshiva that he he ran with his pajamas to find Moshe Rabbeinu and get out. So that was the moment of redemption. Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. And then what Chazal did was they gathered up other sources of great redemptions and help and so on, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu bailed us out of all kinds of big problems in the middle of at night. But when was the middle of the night? Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. It happened at midnight. So the midnight becomes the basis for events prior to Yetziat Mitzrayim and post Yetziat Mitzrayim. This was the great moment of delivery. Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. And to go through the poem, you have somebody who's knowledgeable in Tanakh to know all the stories that are being alluded to poetically. So first you have to figure out poetically who we're talking about, and then recall the stories as well. Okay, so we were lucky. We have a daughter, Ahuva, who's she knows Tanakh by heart, so she was able to supply the information at the Seder table for all the stories. So let's get going here. Right, the poem was written in the late 5th or early 6th century by this poet called Yanai, Yud Nun Aleph Yud, Yanai, or Yud Nun Yud. Sometimes people write it without the Aleph, but Yanai. Fine. I don't know how somebody named somebody Yanai. My gosh, Yanai was a king in the second Beit HaMikdash, and he wasn't all that good. And then he drove out the Shimon ben Shetach, his brother-in-law, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, to Egypt, and the whole Sanhedrin was exiled to Egypt, and so on. And I couldn't understand how the city of Yerushalayim honored Yanai HaMelech with a street near Shlom Tzion HaMalka. But then when I saw that it's a very short and crooked street, I realized it was appropriate. You know, Rehov Yanai. Shlom Tzion HaMalka, she got an autostrada, she got a main street. She was terrific. Chazal really loved her and valued her, and so on. But Yanai HaMelech was for the pits. And he got a little store, a little simta, goes around, a little crooked street, perfect for Yanai HaMelech. But here, they gave somebody Yanai HaMelech. When the Ethiopians came on Aliyah, it's a Jewish agency just handed out biblical names to them without considering what their former names. That changed with time. And they tried to Hebraicize the names that they actually had. But I had a student in my class, 1981, his name was Eov. I mean, my gosh, to give somebody a name like Eov. Yeah. There are people in Israel who have the name Nimrod. Oh my gosh. Okay. Beseder. All right. Tishbi. Yishmael. Yishmael, that's not a bad name. There was Rabbi Akiva's Chaver was Rabbi Shmuel. I mean, there's Yishmael. That's not a terrible name, by the way. Chazal say Yishmael did tshuva at the end of his life. Beseder. You can carry the name. Beseder. All right. So what I printed here, not only with the poem, but also in brackets. This was not part of the poem. This is already an insertion. Who are we talking about? So just scroll down. Avraham, Avimelech, Lavan, Yaakov, Makat Bechorot, Sisra, Sancherev, Bavel, Daniel. I'm reading just the brackets as I'm scrolling down with my eye. Belshazzar, Daniel, Haman, and again Haman. Yeah, we get him twice. Edom, Geula, redemption and Geula. So the idea of putting in Vayehi b'chatzi halayla after each paragraph, I don't think the poet did that. I think it was just at the beginning, at the end, and it was thrown in maybe for song purposes to break it up into stanzas. And the reason why I say that is because some of the stanzas are run-ons. The end of one stanza is Haman, the beginning of the next stanza is Haman. I don't think the poet would have done something like that. So these aren't individual stanzas. So let's see it from the top. Az rov nisim hifleita balayla. Most of the miracles, these wonders, they happened at night. So not all miracles happened at night. There were miracles that happened in the daytime. But the following are great miracles that happened at night. Berosh ashmoret ze halayla. Let's translate this. Many people who study Mishnah, and I'll ask you a question. I'd love to ask adults the question, what was the first Mishnah you ever studied in your lifetime? So many people scratch their heads, especially if they're over 40, and they say, Shnai Moichsen, Brachos, Pirkei Avos, whatever. And then I remind them, the first Mishnah, you was probably 2 years old. It's Manishtana Halayla Hazeh Mikol Halaylot, except that the Ganenet never told you that it was a Mishnah. She may not have even known that it was a Mishnah. But that's usually the first Mishnah that people have studied. But it's a Mishnah. It's in the 10th, the last parak, the 8th chapter of Masechet Psachim, Arbe Psachim, Manishtana Halayla Hazeh Mikol Halaylot. But in school, many times we begin with the beginning of Masechet Brachot, which is the beginning of Shas. Me'ematai korin et Shma be'arvit. From what time do we start reading Shema at nighttime? And the Mishnah continues something about Kohanim. Nichnasim Kohanim lechol b'trumatan. When Kohanim who are tamei come home at night, it's convoluted, and that's try to understand what the meaning is. And the meaning is it's at nighttime after the appearance of the stars, from time of Tzeta Kochavim. And then the question is, until what time can you read the Shema at nighttime? So there are actually 3 opinions. 2 opinions which expand into 3. And the first is Ad Ashmora Rishona. What's an Ashmora? Ashmora means a section of the night. So there were 2 opinions whether the night was divided into 3 sections in the days of Beit HaMikdash, or whether divided into 4 sections in the days of Beit HaMikdash. The Mishnah that says Ad Sof Ashmora Rishona is referring to the view that the night was divided into 3 sections, and it meant a third of the night. That's not our opinion, because the second opinion is Ad Chatzot, until midnight, and the third opinion is Ad She'aleh Amud HaShachar, which is really the opinion of the Chachamim ultimately, but they said you shouldn't drag this out till the 3 in the morning because you're going to forget. So you should make sure you read Kriyat Shema of the nighttime until midnight. The opinion that says that the Ashmorot were 4, so it means the middle of the night was the end of the second Ashmorah, and the third Ashmorah, the third section, began exactly at midnight. And that's what the poem here is taking into consideration. Berosh Ashmorah Zeh Halayla, the beginning of the section of the middle of the night. So it's just a reference to Bechatzi Halayla. Ger Tzedek Nitzachto Ki Ne'echlak Lo Laila. Who is the first Ger in Am Yisrael? It was Avraham Avinu. Clearly, Avraham Avinu. Until Avraham Avinu, we were Bnei Noach. We were all children of Noach. Avraham Avinu becomes the first convert, essentially. And there's a lot to say about that. Maybe before Shavuos we'll talk about it. But where was Ger Tzedek, where was he victorious as the night was divided? Again, as the night was divided equally, which means something happened to Avraham Avinu at midnight. Vayehi b'chasi halayla. So let's go to the source page. And it's source number 2 from Parshat Lech Lecha. It was the war of the 4 kings against the 5 kings, where Avraham Avinu actually didn't want to meddle in international business, except that his nephew Lot fell into captivity, and Avraham puts together a militia to rescue his nephew Lot. And it says, "Vayishma Avram ki nishma echav," that it basically means his nephew here. Vayarek et chanichav yelidei beito. He got together his students, his chanichim. You think this is a Bnei Akiva group here? He had chanichim, and he got together his students. How many? 318. Shmona asar ushlosh bayot. 318. He had a militia. Vayirdof ad Dan. There's a Gemara that says that the word Vayarek is the gematria is the numerical equivalent of 318. No. Eliezer is the gematria, is the numerical equivalent of 318, and Avraham Avinu just went with his sidekick, with Eliezer, and they did it. It wasn't the whole militia. So the question is, so why didn't the Torah just tell that to us? So this is what I'm going to tell you now is just a joke, okay? Is that Avraham Avinu actually went with 1 soldier, except for Misrata Datot, he put down 318 names to get the financing. Okay, unfortunately, there's some truth behind this little joke here. Yeah. So Avraham Avinu drafts a militia, Vayirdof ad Dan. Dan is in the north of the country. Vayechalek aleihem laila. Here's the point. The night was divided. Hu va'avadav, he and his servants. Vayakem vayirdefem ad chova asher mismol Damasek. They're going into Syria. They're going into Syria to rescue Lot. But anyway, the Chazal say that this division of the nighttime, the split, was exactly at Bechatzi Halayla, at midnight. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu obviously was there to help Avraham Avinu be victorious in this particular battle. So that's the first thing that happened at midnight. Ger tzedek nitzachto kinechalak lo laila. Vayibachzi halayla. Next stanza. Danta melech grar b'chalom halayla. All right, so this is now going to bring us to source number 5. Vayavo Elohim el Avimelech. When Avimelech takes Sarah, right? Avram Avinu and Sarah come down to Mitzrayim, come down to Gerar, and Avimelech takes Sarah. Vayomelo hincha meit alisha asher lekachta v'hinei bulat baal. What happened was Avimelech gets a dream in the middle of the night, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, "Don't touch the woman," and so on. Avimelech freezes, and he comes back to Avram Avinu. Why did you tell me? I mean, Avram Avinu was panicked, just like it happened when he went down to Egypt as well. The same thing that he says that she is my sister, and so on. So when did this dream happen? So we'll see a tradition that this dream that Avimelech has, and he gets a word from God to not to touch Sarah. This happens at midnight as well. So this is the second stanza. Danta Avimelech Gerar b'chalom laila. So Gerar is actually in the area of Aza. Exactly, in the area of Aza. B'chalom laila. Hifchadeta Arami, who's the Arami? Lavan ha'Arami, be'emesh laila. So too, when Yaakov Avinu leaves in haste after 20 years, and he packs up and he flees the house of Lavan back to Eretz Canaan, so Lavan tries to follow him, and basically perhaps even to kill him. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, Lavan gets a dream from God, and he says also to lay off and not to touch Yaakov Avinu. So Kadosh Baruch Hu frightens Lavan Arami when? In the middle of the night. This happens also by Bechatzi Halayla. Vayashar Yisrael limalach vayuchalo laila. The battle in Parshat Vayishlach between Yaakov and the representative of Esav, the Malach, the angelic figure, and that happens at night. And there he receives a blessing from this Malach that he overcame, he vanquished Elokim Vatuchal, and that's why he gets the name Yisrael for the first time. He later gets the name Yisrael from HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly, but the first time Yaakov is named Yisrael is right here in Parshat Vayishlach, Vayasha Yisrael lemalach vayuchalo, and he's able to vanquish and overcome him. That happened at nighttime. So go back to the source page, to source number 3. This is the Medrash Rabbah, on Parshat Lech Lecha, and it reads, Vayechalek aleihem laila, going back to Avraham Avinu, and it says, V'Rabbanan Amri, Chachamim said, Yotzro Chelko, his creator divided the night. It means God divided the night. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Avihem Pa'al Imi Bachatzot Laila, your forefather, that is Abraham, served me, worked on my behalf at midnight. Afani Po'el Imbanav Bachatzi Halayla. So too I, God, will function to save his, that is Abraham's, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren in Egypt at midnight. Ve'ematai, where will this take place? B'Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Shene'emar, as it says, Vayehi b'chatzi halayla v'Hashem hika kol b'chor. Notice the precedent that Avraham Avinu said, did what he did at midnight, kicks in this whole Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. And it's source number 4, with regard to the Medrash Rabbah in Parshat Balak, Vayavo Elokim el Bulam Laila. So the Medrash then goes to say, this is the implication of what's said about the night of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Leil shimurim hu lashem hu halayla hazeh kol hanisim shenasu liYisrael. All the miracles that were performed to Am Yisrael. Upara lahem min harashaim balayla. And God took care of the evil people at nighttime. So they all happened at midnight. Balayla haya. It happened at nighttime. Vayavo Elokim el Lavan ar ha'ami b'chalom halayla. We just talked about Lavan. And then it says, Vayavo Elokim el Avimelech b'chalom layla. Avram Avinu and Avimelech. Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. And Vayehi he'anan v'achoshech vayaer et halayla. This already at Kriyat Yamsuf. Vayachalek alehem layla. And this was again by Avram Avinu. V'chein kulam. The Medrash says, all of them. There are just so many, as we would say, etc., etc., etc. And here, the Yanai gives us the etc., etc., etc. Right? He's spelling it out. So let's get back to the poem. The third stanza. Zera b'chorei Patros machatzta b'chatzi layla. Who is the nation of Patros? So here, I'm going to look at the source page. And on source number 9, it's where in Parshat Noach you have the genealogy of Mitzrayim. It says of Mitzrayim, Mr. Mitzrayim. There was a man by the name of Mitzrayim, one of the grandchildren of Noach. Mitzrayim Yalad, ve'et Patrusim. So Patros is from the offspring of Mitzrayim. So sometimes poetically in Tanakh, Mitzrayim is called Patros. And just look at the line right before from Hosea, Perek Yud Bet, you get the phrase that Yana uses to refer to the naming of Yaakov as Yisrael, that he overcame the Malach. Vayashar el Malach vayuchal. So you have this phrase that he lifted out of this pasuk, and you see it in the last the end of the second paragraph where it says Vayashar Yisrael le Malach vayuchal lo Laila. And now we're in the next paragraph. Zera b'chorei Patros, the firstborns of the Egyptians. You smashed, machatzta. But when? B'chatzi halayla, exactly at midnight. Chelam lo matz'u b'kumam balayla. There are different explanations to what this means. Some say the word chelam, the word chayil, we use it today in terms of soldiers or defenders. In Tanakh, it actually refers to the wall around a city, which was the mode of protection. And it's not an accident that the word chayil or chayil, which means warriors, comes from that too, because they're walking walls. The wall is to protect around the city. And the country has protectors who move around, and they are the chayalim. So the chaylam, when we say Barech Hashem chaylo, it means the Kadosh Baruch Hu will protect the defenders. Or where it says Yi Shalom b'Chelech, it means that the protection of Am Yisrael should be blessed. And it's a spin-off. It has to do with soldiers too. But the pshat, the simple understanding of the word chelam, is the wall. In this particular case, it could mean the booty that Am Yisrael took from the Egyptians before they even left. You know, the Torah says that Am Yisrael was asked to go to the neighbors and quote unquote borrow some jewelry and borrow some this. And the Egyptians were very gracious, you know. But they're leaving for 3 days. That's what they were told. They're leaving for 3 days. And the moral justification for this was it was 210 years worth of back salary, back pay. That's what it was. We deserved to be paid for it. And we weren't paid for our labor. And therefore, I mean, to a certain degree, I know there was a very big national outcry here in Israel in 1951 when the West German government offered reparations to Holocaust survivors. So there were those who said, okay, we'll take it. And there were others say, no, you can't pay back for what happened. Okay, there were different things. You know, Menachem Begin, Zichron Livracha, was very against it. But Ben-Gurion was in favor of it, and because he felt it would help the economy of the country, which was struggling in its first days. And that time, Konrad Adenauer, from the Prime Minister of Germany, so he offered it as something, you know, as we say in Yiddish, epis, you know, something, you know, whatever. And the rationale of people who took it said, listen, this is not to return, you know, people who were murdered. That will never, there's no forgiveness on that. But there was also dinei mamonot. There was also monetary considerations. They stole our property. They stole our belongings and everything. They made us work in the camps. So we deserve, you know, back pay for all that work. So why shouldn't we take it? Okay, but I'm not here to be judgmental one way or another. I'm just pointing out that it was a national outcry. The country rocked in 1951 over this issue. Today it's a mood issue. Nobody talks about it anymore. But the idea that we had a moral justification of taking this as payment for that which we work, you see that according to the Torah, that was perfectly legitimate. So chelam, it could be a reference to that. Lo matzu bikumam balayla. When the Egyptians woke up at the middle of the night, when Egypt was rocking because of makat bechorot and everybody was screaming, they found their drawers were empty. Why were they empty? Because they unloaded it to the Bnei Israel. And then they were yelling, oh, ganavim, gazlanim, ganavim, and so on. So that's one understanding. There's also an understanding that they were when they went out as an army, as the sus v'rochvo, chariot and rider, the army of the Egyptians, they were actually, in Yiddish we say fatumult. They were all mixed up. They just lost it. In English we would say. And if you take a look at source number 10, by Yirdufu Mitzrayim, the Egyptians were running after Bnei Israel. Vayehi b'shmorat haboker, and as the morning came, vayashkef Hashem el machanei Mitzrayim ba'amud eish ve'anan vayahom et machanei Mitzrayim. Somehow there was a pillar of fire that blinded the Egyptians, and they were completely disoriented. Vayahom means they were disoriented completely. Vayasar ate ofan markovotav vayanagiu b'tveidud. The chariot wheels broke, and they were schlepping. They were beating the horses to move anyway. Vayom Mitzrayim. The Egyptians said, "Anusa b'nei Yisrael ki Hashem nilcham lahem b'Mitzrayim." It's a lost cause. God's on their side. God's on their side, and so on. So this could be the reference that Yanai has. Chelam lo matzu bikumam balaylo. And they got up at night. They couldn't find their way. They were lost. They were completely lost. That's another understanding. And then it says, Tisat nagid charoshet silita b'chochavei laila. We've jumped now in history to the story of Dvorah. This is the book of Shoftim. But before that happens, there's a possible line. Instead of chelam lo matzu bikumam balayla, I'm going to read now from a line that you don't have, but this was a nusach of the Vayehi Halayla that was actually found in the Cairo Geniza. And it read, instead of chelam lo matzu bikumam balayla, it read chilchalta midyan v'chaverav balayla bitzlil lechem b'chalom layla. The story of Gidon and the Midyanim, another story in Sefer Shoftim, where there was an episode that happened at nighttime. What happened was the camp of the Midyanim, Kadosh Baruch Hu caused the bread stock or the food stock to start vibrating, and apparently it sounded off like an alarm, and they didn't know what was happening. Maybe Kadosh Baruch Hu caused an earthquake. Something started moving. I mean, people have been in earthquakes at home, so sometimes you have pots and all kinds of kitchen utensils hanging nicely, and all of a sudden, if there's an earthquake, they start banging, right? And you start hearing ding dongs, and it's very scary. So this happened, and they were frightened. The Midyanim were frightened, and ultimately, that fright caused their downfall. Fright is contagious on the battlefield. The Torah knows that, and that's why it says, "Mia ish hayareh v'racha levav." If somebody is panic-stricken, send him home. We don't need him on the battlefield. We don't need him on the battlefield. I remember when we had the Gulf War, and Rav Avram Shapiro Zatzal, who was the chief rabbi of Israel at the time, I was invited by the Israel radio to get on live Fridays to give over the latest updated information of how to keep Shabbat with the Gulf War going. And it was interesting. It took about 6 weeks for the Rabbanut to get it right, because they were making changes. They were refining and updating each time. And I remember sitting with Rav Shapiro, trying to give him, in my language, what I was getting from the authorities, from the Pikuda. I don't think we had Pikuda Orif then. I think they created it afterwards. But whatever, the army was giving information, and he was then translating it halachically of how we should give it over to the people. But what? In turn sirens, what to do, and with the sealed rooms, and whether you're allowed to have plastic and seal the room on the bottom. There are all kinds of halachic questions. Of course, with the radio, that's when they started the Gala Shaket, right? It was so quiet that people didn't hear it. It was the problem of dealing with this in the middle of the night. So what's that want to say? Right. So Rav Shapiro told me to emphasize that there's one mitzvah in the whole concept of Milchemet mitzvah. You're not allowed to be afraid. I remember you telling me this. Emphasize this. You're not allowed to be afraid. To be afraid is an avera. And if you're afraid, it's going to make the next person. And if it's in a household, the parents are going to make the kids scared. And the parents have an obligation to calm the children down. He explained, he says, more important than the tape about a windows and by the door, he felt, he should talk about this and how important it is that we have to, be calm and collect as much as humanly possible. But this was an event that took place at night as well. Why it got shafted in some of the nuschot, I don't have a clue. But the next line that we have takes us to Dvorah, and that was the war against Sisera. So we have the Shirah in Perek Dalet in Shoftim. You have the Shirat Dvorah. Now we read it on the Parshat Shirat Dvorah. We read it on the Parshat Bishalach. We have Shirat Hayam. So we read it actually, and the Nusach Sfard, they have it good. They just read the Shira. The Ashkenaz have twice as long as the Haftarah because they read the prose also. The prose is the story, and then the Shira poetically reviews the story. So Ashkenazim, if you remember a few weeks ago, Parshat Bishalach, it was a very, very long Haftarah because you have to read the whole Shoftim Perek Dalet that includes the Shira. If you look at Nusach Sfard, it said, not Nusach Sfard, the Sfaradim, not Nusach Sfard, the Sfaradim, it says, Kan matchilim ha-Sfaradim. Here the Sfaradim start. Vayashar Dvarav, and she starts. Okay, so in that story, if you look at source number 11, it says, Vayizak Sisra et kol richbo shameot rechev barzel. He had armed chariots. I mean, this is like a tank he's got. His chariots were armed with, were coated with armor. 900. V'et kol ha'am asher ito mecharoshet hagoyim el nachal kishon. Okay, so let's look what the poet does with this. And he says, Tisat negid charoshet silita b'kochavei laila. Because the psukim go on to say that a Kadosh Baruch Hu organized the kochavim as almost an astrological point to work in our favor. I mean, it basically meant that Kadosh Baruch Hu was moving the stars to work in our favor. The word tisa, very close to my heart. Right? It means flight. In this case, it means he was in flight. He was moving quickly, very, very quickly. The Nagid Charoshet. Nagid Charoshet here is the leader of that group at Charoshet. Macharoshet Hagoyim, from the pasuk in source number 11, and it's a reference to Sisera. And he, on his track, was battered at midnight as well. So that's another episode. And then the next paragraph. Ya'atz mecharef lenofef ivui. This is already the time of Yeshayahu, and it's about 110 years before the Churban, the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. It was at the time that the 10 tribes were driven out of Eretz Yisrael in the north, and what was left was just the center of the country, what was called the Mamlcha of Yehuda. It had the 2 tribes of Yehuda and Binyamin, and those Kohanim, who were Leviim from Shevet Levi, who were there. But the 10 tribes were driven east, and Sancherev, the king of Ashur, was surrounding Yerushalayim and threatening to destroy Beit HaMikdash, and was cursing out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it says here, Ya'atz mecharef. Mecharef is from an expression of cursing. Lenofef ivui. Nofef ivui. Ivui is a nickname of Beit HaMikdash here. He was like, Nofef yado. Nofef yado means, in Yiddish we say, machavek mit the hand. Just get rid of him. He wanted to get rid of Beit HaMikdash, But HaKadosh Baruch Hu had different plans. Hovashta pigarav balayla. There was a nighttime that the entire troops of Sancheiriv were just dead. Were just dead. They were found dead. They all had a heart attack, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu just put them away miraculously at nighttime. And Yeshayahu talks about this. So that was another thing that happened at midnight, according to Chazal. Kara Bel umatzavo beishon laila. This has to do with the downfall of Bavel, the Babylonians, who also were. I think I have a pasuk here, the second page. Right. Source 15. Karav Bel Kores Nivo Hayu Atzebem LaChayav LaBeima Nusuot Musot Masar LaYefa. Here, what Yeshayahu is doing, he's forecasting the collapse of the Babylonian Empire, and that happens at night as well. Leish Chamudot Nigla Raz Chazut Laila. Who's the Ish Chamudot? All my grandchildren. Right? It's like somebody asked, they saw somebody, a grandmother wheeling a grandson on the Rehov Ha'ilui in Kiryat Moshe, and somebody said, "Who's the Ilui?" He said, "He's the Ilui." Right? Ish Chamudot is Daniel. And Daniel is a story in itself. Most of the book is written in Aramaic, so it's a little bit of a hard study. You have to have translation for the Aramaic. But what happens at the beginning of the book, Daniel is found in Bavel, and he somehow or another, he and Hananel, Mishael, Azariah, they find themselves in the court of Nebuchadnezzar as advisors, and Nebuchadnezzar actually is very interested to hear from his advisors about a particular disturbing dream that he has. It was a dream that he wanted to see who really knew his business, because he didn't even reveal what the dream was. Unlike Paro in Parshat Miketz, where Paro has a dream, very disturbing set of dreams, and he tells his mechavshim, he tells his advisors what the dream was, but nobody gives satisfactory answer until Yosef comes along and gives an answer. Nebuchadnezzar, either he didn't remember the dream, or he remembered the dream but was testing his advisor to see who's really good, who can tell me what the dream was. And the only one who really was able to do it was Daniel. And Daniel is really promoted to a very high position, which ultimately almost leads to his downfall, because the other sarim, the other ministers, were very jealous of him. And one suggested that that they make a law. And I'm sorry, this is already not Nebuchadnezzar. This is already Daryavesh. This is not Nebuchadnezzar. It's already the Persian. It's already the Persian era of, and it was Darius who is convinced by some of his workers that maybe for a month's time, anybody who prays to any god should face the king, the direction of the king. Okay, they knew that Daniel prays to God facing Yerushalayim, and they're going to catch him in the act. That's exactly what happens. And what happened was, the rule was, if anybody's caught not facing the king in his prayer, is going to be thrown to the Guv Arayot, to the lion's den. And just like we remember from the story of Megillat Esther, Persia had an interesting law. Achashverosh has a law. If the ruling, was official, you couldn't retrieve it. You couldn't repeal the law. And Mordechai and Esther had to deal with that. Ein lahashiv. You couldn't repeal the law. So, all right. So Achashverosh came around and he said, all right, you make another law that you guys can fight, you Jews can fight back. But we cannot undo the law that Haman set in. So too, Daniel was caught in a trap here. And the king was caught. He realized, what did they do to me? I can't repeal the law. And of course they caught Daniel in the act, and they throw him in the Guv Arayot, and miraculously he's saved. And they pull him out, and the king orders all those other sarim to be thrown into the lion's den. And the lions actually had a very good lunch that day, no doubt. And the king was extremely grateful obviously, that Daniel was saved. So this has to do with the fact that, number one, Leish Chamudot, to Daniel, Nigla Raz Chazot Laila, it was revealed to him the secret of the dream that the king had at night, Vayibasi Halayla. And then it goes on to another story, Mishtaker Bichlei Kodesh Nerag Bo Balayla. This was Belshazzar. Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. This is a little bit out of historic order now, where the son of Nebuchadnezzar, the end of the Babylonian era, literally the end. He gets drunk using the vessels from Beit HaMikdash that his father Nebuchadnezzar had brought down from Yerushalayim, and somehow he is murdered because there's a message that's scribbled on the wall at this party that the Babylonian era is over. And indeed, Belshazzar is murdered that night. And the next line brings us back to Daniel. Nosha, he was rescued, Mibor Arayot, from the pit of the lions. Poter Ba'atute Laila, the one who, Itut means actually a prayer, the one who revealed all the interpretations through his tefillah at nighttime. Sina Natar Agagi. Okay, so now we're at Purim. Who is the Agagi? Haman. Haman Agagi. The hatred that was propagated by Haman. V'chatav Svarim, and he wrote the laws. Those are the books that were put together at nighttime, right? Because this is when Haman visited Achashverosh at night, and he had this great plan of what he's going to do with OUisrael. And then the next pasuk is also referring to the Purim story, but with the twist on the Purim story. Where does it turn around? Where exactly in the Megillah does the story turn around for OUisrael's favor? It's the beginning of the 6th chapter. Halayla Bahu Nadada Shnat HaMelech. Right, so many Balei Kriya would read the word HaMelech in the nigun of the Shlich Tzibur of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, HaMelech. Balaylahu, on that night. Now, there's a 4-way machloket. How much of the Megillah do you have to read on Purim to fulfill the mitzvah? So, of course, we adopted the maximum strategy. That is from the beginning. Second opinion was from Ish Yehudi Haya B'Shushan Habira, the appearance of Mordechai. If we just started from there and you read throughout the Megillah, you fulfilled the obligation. The third opinion is the beginning of chapter 3, when Haman arrives on the scene. Then, when Haman arrives on the scene. The fourth opinion is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu arrives on the scene. Balaylahu nadada shnat hamelech, when Achashverosh couldn't sleep well that night. And okay, so the Medrash says, who couldn't sleep well that night? Malko Shel Olam. Kadosh Baruch Hu wasn't sleeping well that night. When OUisrael is in that kind of imminent danger, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as if to say, awakens. And that's why Balayla Hu Nadada Shnat HaMelech. Kadosh Baruch Hu was jolted into, and Chazal say that HaMelech is Kodesh. It's a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So here, this was Orarta Nitzchacha Alecha Benedet Shnat Laila. You awaken your victory, you, Kadosh Baruch Hu, your victory, when you yourself were jolted from the middle of the night. Pura Tidrach the Shomer Mami Laila. This is now a reference to the down. Again, it's shifting. He's shifting back and forth historically. But if you look at source number 18, Pura Darachti Livadi. This is Yeshayahu forecasting the downfall of the Babylonian Empire. So again, we know there's 70 years of exile. But when does the clock start ticking? So there were actually 2 messages of 70 years in Yirmiyahu Hanavi, in chapter 25 and chapter 29, because the clock started ticking twice in different times frameworks. The first time was when Bavel took over Eretz Israel 18 years before the destruction. Babylonians were here already. And 70 years start ticking. And when does that end? When the Persians take over. There's still no Beit HaMikdash yet, but the Persians took over. There's another 70 years from the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash to the beginning of the building of the second Beit HaMikdash. So there's an overlap. It's not 70 and 70. There's an overlap of 18 years on each side. First is 70, but then 18 years after the first 70 begin the next clock of 70. And there was a third clock in between there of where Achashverosh thought was the 70, and that was from Galut Yechonia, 11 years before the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. So this is a prophecy of the downfall of not only Bavel, but Yeshayahu was talking about Edom. And who is Edom classically by Chazal? Rome. This is our exile. Galut Edom. Pura Tidroch. Torah means to trample on the grapes. When they would squeeze wine, make wine, they would step on the grapes. The Kadosh Baruch Hu was going to step on them. L'shomer ma milayla. Sarach kishomer v'sach ata boker gam layla. They will be screaming. The enemy will be screaming as their nighttime will come. And all this moves into the last paragraph of Karev Yom Ashehu Lo Yom V'Lo Laila. This is a takeoff from Zechariah Perek Yudalid, source number 20, the Milchemet Gog Umagog, the last war before the coming of Mashiach. That's where the pasuk that we say 3 times a day, Vaya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, Vayomu Yeshem echad shmo echad. What does it say there in Zechariah Yudalid? V'haya yom echad hu yivadal Hashem lo yom v'lo laila. V'haya le'eit erev yeh or. It's going to be illuminated as the night begins. This is going to be very important. Look what he says in the poem. Karev yom asher hu lo yom v'lo laila. It's not day, not night. Even though on the clock it's already the beginning of night. Shomrim hafked le'ircha kol hayom v'chol halayla. Kadosh Baruch Hu has been watching over the city of Yerushalayim day and night. Ta'ir, illuminate. This is a prayer, a tefillah, a petition. Ta'ir, illuminate. Ke'or yom. We say or chadash hatzion ta'ir. V'nizkechu lanu meira la'oro. Ta'ir ke'or yom cheshkat laila. Illuminate the darkness of the night. It should be bright. It should be bright. Because Zechariah is saying there's going to be a brightness in the air as the end of the night. The end of the night means the end of the galut. The galut is going to be illuminated. And here comes a very important halacha. We know that the saying of Hallel is only to be said in the daytime. So Mishnah, in the second chapter of Masechet Megillah, Kol hayom kasher leBegillah, leKriyat Hallel, leTkiyat Shofar, leTilat Lulav. It's a whole string of things that we only fulfill in the daytime, and one of them is Hallel. The only halachic exception that we have is Seder night. Seder night carries Hallel in the Seder, and according to many, many customs, and now it's minhag across the board here in Eretz Yisrael, during Tfilat Arvit, during Ma'ariv of the night of Pesach, of the Seder night, we also include Hallel. There's no precedent for this. So people say, okay, every rule has an exception. L'kol klal yesh yotzeh min haklal. Every rule has exception. And our Rabbi, the Rav, said, this is not an exception. But the Hallel that we say at night of Seder night is because it is the morning, daytime. There is brightness there. And this is the emunah, the feeling that even though we might still be in Galut, Ta'ir ka'or yom cheshkat laila, Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla. When do we get to say Hallel in the Seder night? After we've eaten the Afikaimen. Then we get to the Hallel, which is at midnight. And to us, while astronomically it might be dark outside, that's a figment of our imagination. It is bright light outside, and that's why we were able to halachically say Hallel on the night of the Seder. And this is the story of Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla. And what's interesting is the Rabbi Akiva, who was a naturalist and felt that Bar Kokhba could have been Mashiach, he believed that the Geula is actually going to come about by natural causes, by natural events. Those who studied Daf Yomi yesterday on Daf Tzadik Chet, the Gemara brought the pasuk from Yeshayahu, Ani Hashem v'ita achishena, in its time I will hasten. Seems to be a little bit of an oxymoron. If it's in its time, it's not hastened. If it's hastened, it's not in its time. So Gemara says, Zachu achishena, lo zachu v'ita. If Am Yisrael is worthy, it's going to happen instantaneously. If not, it's going to happen anyway, in its proper time.
And the Gemara brings another pasuk, Ani Rochev al Chamor from Daniel, that it's going to be through, as the Maralmi Prague says, the word Chomriyut from the material world is going to happen naturally. Rabbi Akiva was proponent that the Galut is going to carry out throughout the whole nighttime. And when is the moment of Gula? In the morning. Achi aleh amud shachar. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, no, there's going to be divine intervention in the middle of the night. Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla. And that's why Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah attached the idea of Makat Bechorot with the moment of Geula. And that's why the Korban Pesach, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, can only be till midnight. And if you remember the story of the Seder in Bnei Brak, they were sitting, who was there? Among others, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, with Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Tarfon. And they were sitting the whole night. Why were they sitting the whole night? Because Rabbi Akiva was the Mara Da'atra, the Rav in Bnei Brak. And therefore they followed his opinion that the Seder continues until the morning. But what did Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah do when the clock struck 12, halachic midnight? He didn't get up and he says, I'm done, because I believe the Seder is finished. There's no more Korban Pesach. And the mitzvah of storytelling of Yetziat Mitzrayim is linked to the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach. But he had derech eretz, and he didn't walk out, but he made a comment. Amar lahem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Most of you in the Haggadah won't have that word lahem. It's in the Rambam's version of the Haggadah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said at this Seder in Bnei Brak to the others, Amar lahem, Harei ani kiven shemim shana, I'm almost 70 years old. V'lo zachiti sheteyama yetziat Mitzrayim baleilot. He was talking about the mitzvah of every night, the third chapter of Shema. So what is he bringing this in? He's trying to teach us that I believe that even though there is no mitzvah of the unique mitzvah of the storytelling of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim after midnight, but I believe that there's a mitzvah of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim every night of the year. So normally we'll fulfill it in about 30 seconds by saying that pasuk at the end of Shema, Ani Hashem Lokechem Asher Hotzeiti Etchem Mitzrayim. But there's no Baal Tosef on this. I can go 5 hours on the Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim. So what I am remaining now at the Seder of Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak is carrying on now the other mitzvah, the regular routine mitzvah of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim. But according to Rabbi Akiva, it's the very unique mitzvah of talking about Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim that's linked to the eating of the Korban Pesach. God willing, we will have the opportunity, Vayehi Bechatzi Halayla, and we'll have the Sanhedrin to tell us if we can eat the Korban Pesach until midnight or go the distance. And Shabbat Chag Sameach to all of you.